All right, so we should be live on the Facebook DMD page. You see us, and in the group as well. So we should be all over the place. Let me confirm.
Yeah, we're live.
All right, perfect. Well, everybody, let me welcome you on this almost middle to end of November. We are a week before Thanksgiving. My name is Curtis Webster. For those who don't know me, I want to welcome you to our part of our November Men's Health Series. We have taken the month to really highlight all the kinds of different aspects of men's health, the physical, the mental. We've had guests talking about postpartum depression. We were talking about healthy cooking and healthy eating, healthy lifestyles. As you know, or for those that are new to the DMD ecosphere, we started Dads Married to Doctors with the goal of empowering and educating and supporting the physician family by helping the guys to become better men, better husbands, and better fathers. So one of the ways that we're able to do that is through strategic coursework and guest speakers that we bring into our DMD Plus community. And today we have an extra special guest with recently retired Navy SEAL Commander Jon Macaskill. Thank you for joining us, Jon.
Hey, Curtis, happy to be here. And like I said, just before the pre-show, happy to learn a lot of lessons from you guys, just as much as I'm willing to share what I've learned. I'm married to a healthcare worker in being married to an orthopedic physician assistant. And I'm a dad as well of two little ones. I got a late start. I've got a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old and another one on the way.
Nice, congrats.
Yeah, thanks very much. I appreciate that. And yeah, there's tons to learn. And so, like I said, I'm more than happy to be here to share what I've learned along the way as far as leadership and mental health and some of the other things that we're going to talk about. But I'm also happy to be here so that I can learn some lessons from this group.
Yeah, well, I know you're one of the best. I was talking with Scott, my partner in betterment, my partner in betterment within the DMD community, and I know you and Scott had an amazing interview. So Scott, let me bring you on and let you talk about your conversation experiences with Jon and what we're looking to talk about today.
Yeah, great, Jon. Hey, congrats on kid number 3. That's news. Along with the hair and sideburns, that's something new since last time we talked. But yeah, so Jon was on the podcast. I've published that link throughout DMD Plus, and downloads reflects. Guys are listening to it. But if you haven't listened to that episode, what I had on Jon on my show for was talk, more about the leadership aspect of being a Navy SEAL commander and his lessons learned and all those things and things that we can apply to our daily lives. Now, near the end of that show, he was started talking about his now, new focus, new passion, new business of mindfulness, mental health, raising that awareness, because especially as military members, we go through a lot of crap in our careers, in our short careers, right?
Right.
And it's super important, but it's also important for everyone. If you look at the stats right now, 3 of 4 suicides are men. You look at, right, and of that is a lot of guys who lose themselves, guys who lose who they are. And when you have these deep conversations with guys in D&D, we're actually really prone to that. We're prone to that because often we have to put our wives first. Our wives are the ones that are leading the family in terms of being breadwinners. They're the ones that their careers come first. They're the ones that run the schedule because their schedules are all over the place. And often guys, kind of just go with it, give everything they got to help make this work. But in the end, they lose a bit of themselves. And I was there too, once upon a time. So hence why it's a great time to have Jon on to talk about this stuff, because as we talked about in the podcast, you had some rough times, but you brought yourself out of those rough times and into where you're at today. And, who better to have a conversation with than a former Navy SEAL commander, a guy who's been through it. And not to mention, we had a lot of good laughs too. So thanks, Jon, buddy, for coming on.
Yeah, Scott, happy to be here, man. Thanks for all that you're doing for the men that are married to doctors, the fathers that are married to doctors. Yeah, it's definitely important work. And thanks for all you're doing on the leadership aspect as well. Also a very important side of things. So again, like I said before, happy to be here.
No, that's awesome. Well, thank you, John, and thank you, Scott, for the intro and the background, and then also joining us today. So one of the perks and one of the things that we do within DMD Plus, which is our separate community for this particular growth and accountability, that's a really big piece of it. And we have Jason Robinson joining us from Texas, and there might be some other DMD Plus members to pop in today so that we can have an interactive Q&A and learn from John and from one another. So Jason, here in a little bit after I get it started, we'll let you pop in and unmute, and you can jump in and ask questions. And then guys that are watching us within the group or on the page, if you have any questions for John, please list it down in the comments, and I will try and get to it as we talk. So John, let's jump right in. I know you already talked about you're married to a physician's assistant. You have 2 young kids, 4 and under, with 1 on the way. So you're right in the throes of daddyhood and all those fun things. So if you can take us back, tell us a little bit about your military career, and then bring us up to where you are today and what you're working on.
Sure. So let's see. Joined the Navy out of high school, enlisted in the Navy first. I was a parachute rigger, and that was September of 1996. Joined for a Navy parachute rigger, which, when I first throw that term out there, a lot of people think that I'm rigging parachutes for people to jump out of airplanes,
Right.
Which there definitely are guys who do that. But my job at the time was the technical term for that job is aircrew survival equipment man. So I worked on F-18 ejection seats and all the survival equipment that goes into an ejection seat so the pilot can survive once he or she lands on the ground. And did that for just over a year, and then got an appointment and a nomination and an appointment to the Naval Academy in Annapolis. Went through my 4 years there. Definitely overwhelmed initially, the 1 year out of school, and then getting into the Naval Academy. I'd forgotten all my calculus, my chemistry, and everything else, and had to do some serious catch up. But I was able to catch up, and then when I graduated from the academy in 2001, went out to Navy SEAL training in Coronado, California. Did my training out there, and then went into the SEAL teams for most of the rest of my career. I did one 2-year stint at Monterey at the Naval Postgraduate School out there, getting my master's degree. And then the rest of the time was either at the SEAL teams or with Special Operations community, setting the operations up for the teams.
Nice.
In 2005, that was my first deployment, my first actual deployment, deployed to Afghanistan, and ended up being attached to Navy SEAL Team 10, and we ended up losing a lot of guys on that deployment.
Oh, wow.
Ended up losing 11 SEALs and 8 Army Night Stalkers on one Operation Red Wings. You may have read the book or seen the movie Lone Survivor. That's the operation that movie and book is about.
Right.
And there was kind of back and forth as to who was going to be on that operation. At one time I was going to be on it, another time I was pulled off of it, and Mike Murphy, the gentleman who received the Medal of Honor for that operation.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he didn't receive the Medal of Honor for the movie. He received the Medal of Honor for the operation. So he got the Medal of Honor a few nights before. He and I were talking, and I had opted, hey, you know what? I think this operation is kind of a mess as far as planning is concerned, as far as what it is we're looking to do. I think we should push back on this. And Murph, right. He agreed, but he was like, you know what, John, I agree, but I'll take this operation. Wow. So he led it, because he and I were flip-flopping as far as leading the surveillance and reconnaissance operations. So that's the time when you go in and you just observe a target for a day or two prior to actually doing an assault on it.
Right.
So he led that surveillance and reconnaissance, and I think we all know what happened there. They got compromised. He ended up dying on the battlefield, along with 2 others on the battlefield, and then the Quick Reaction Force was shot down.
Wow.
So that hit me pretty hard, and I struggled with that for several years through my time in the Navy, and I didn't quite know what it was that I was struggling with, but exactly. there was something that was causing me some anxiety, some depression, some stress through my career. And the Navy did what they thought was best, and they put me on antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, and they definitely helped with the anxiety and the depression for sure. I'm not questioning that.
Right.
But what they also did was numb me to any kind of joy of life.
Right.
So they did what they were supposed to do. They took the anxiety and the depression away, but they numbed any kind of joy that I was getting. So through the years of taking that medication with a C, I finally got introduced to meditation with a T, and was able to come off of those medications. And meditation with a T is what I attribute to not only changing my life for the better, but quite honestly saving my life, because I was starting to have suicidal thoughts
Right.
about, hey, maybe this world would be better without me. Why am I here? And my brothers were on that operation. Why did they die? What's my purpose? And at the time, I hadn't really identified a purpose. Ended up having children late in my career, and that ended up being a purpose for sure. And I think that's huge. Once you're able to identify a purpose for yourself, that helps out a lot. So having children helped, but at the same time, it added a whole new level of stress that I wasn't aware of.
Oh yeah.
So luckily, I had the meditation that helped me to deal with that stress and anxiety of the military career, but it also helped me to deal with the stress and anxiety of being a new dad late in my career, and then also dealing with being married to somebody in the healthcare arena. My wife at the time was going through an orthopedic fellowship. She is a PA, not a physician, but still there's a lot of overlap there in what it is they do. And that fellowship took her away a lot of the time. Again, and still takes her away. The fellowship is over, but her job takes her away a lot.
Right.
So again, looking forward to learning lessons here on the show today. So yeah, that's probably a little bit longer of an explanation than what you'd ask for, but that's it.
No, that's perfect, because that's what I wanted to hear was a little, and for those that don't know, you aren't familiar with your background, wanted you to bring them up to speed on where you're at. And then also, I know a lot of your work today is helping other veterans, other military members to deal with the headspace, right? There's basically those two options: medication or meditation. And obviously there's some options in between, but I love that you have dealt with both of those and seen how they work. Not only with the military side, but also being a dad and being married, because we know there's its own set of frustrations and challenges and happiness that comes along with those roles as well.
Absolutely.
So let me ask you this. It's so interesting what you were talking about with, and I think you had called it in another podcast, survivor guilt. And so the whole idea of looking at that situation and, like you said, why not me, or why me? Why was I saved? And so on and so forth. One of my neighbors actually was supposed to fly one of the planes on 9/11. He actually was supposed to, he was supposed to be the pilot. And similar situation, one of his colleagues called him and said, "Hey, actually, I want to get some extra hours or whatever. Let me take that flight instead of you." And and so we had a very similar conversation. He actually ended up doing a whole documentary about called "Died in My Place." And so that whole idea of why them, why not me? Why him, why not me? So at that beginning time, did you recognize that you were having those challenges? Did the military recognize it? How did that process go of recognizing you were in a bad place and ultimately getting some kind of help?
Sure. So it was a little bit of both. As far as identifying that it was survivor guilt and those feelings specifically, I think I had kind of taken what I'd experienced and boxed it up and put it down in the basement to process later.
Push it down.
When that bubbled to the surface and started causing the stress and anxiety and depression, I don't think I realized exactly what it was. So I did go and seek help through the psychologists and psychiatrists initially, and that's where I got put on the medication. And again, that did help to a point. It helped to numb the pain, and that was important. But then, being married, trying to have some fun, I wasn't having the fun and enjoying life as much as I felt I should be, even during times that were, good. They
Yeah.
weren't hitting me in the way that times that were good in the past had hit me. I wasn't enjoying them to the level that I felt that I should be. So that's when I started talking with the counselors and saying, look, hey, the medication is great. It's definitely numbing the pain, but I don't think that it's doing, or rather, I think that it's doing too much. I think that it's taking away the enjoyment of life.
Right.
And one of the counselors recognized what it was. And he was like, hey, I think you're not processing something. And I think you should really do some meditation and practice mindfulness. And
Wow.
as I think I told Scott on his podcast, it's like, hey, look, doc, I'm a Navy SEAL. I don't practice meditation. I don't practice whatever this mindfulness stuff is that you're talking about. And God bless him. He was a good guy, man. He had a lot of patience with me, and over weeks reintroduced it to me as performance enhancement. And
Nice.
as a Navy SEAL, I'm always looking for ways to perform better, get an edge over my enemy, and quite honestly, get an edge over my brothers on the battlefield. Hey, we're always competing against one another. We always say, hey, it's not a race, it's not a competition. And then whenever we're doing some type of physical training, we always try to outdo one another.
It totally is,
So
right?
yeah, if it's physical training, or if it's training on the shooting range, whatever, we're always trying to beat the other person right next to us, which is good because it ultimately makes us better. And we'll get into that piece a little bit later, where we talk about surrounding ourselves with people who are better than ourselves. But anyhow, that guy introduced it to me as performance enhancing. That's when I was like, okay, yeah, sure, I can use an edge. So I started meditating, very simple, just using an app that I downloaded off the internet on my phone. Just it was called Insight Timer, and just used a couple of minutes here and there. Started very, very slow. Started very, very small, because what I found was, if I try to do more than just 5 minutes at a time, my mind was all over the place.
Right.
Little did I know that even learning that is part of the process. But anyway, started slow. After a few weeks, went back to him and I was like, hey, doc, I don't know if this is working for me. And again, he had tremendous patience with me, and it's like, hey, well, that's like going to the gym for a couple of weeks and thinking that you're going to come out looking like Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I was like,
Right.
good point, doc. All right, well, I'll take it back. So I went back, continued for another 6 weeks or so after that. So a total of about 2 months of regular practice in the morning and at lunch. And that's when I started to see differences in how I was seeing things. At the time, I was like, oh, you know what? I'm going to come off the medication.
Right.
So I came off medication as I was going on to meditation, and started to enjoy things again. And I'm sure that had to do with coming off of the medication, but it also, the stress and anxiety didn't come back in this massive wave that I had kind of anticipated when I was like, hey, I'm coming off of a medication. The doctors, the psychiatrists that had put me on the medication were like, hey, coming off of medication like that is pretty dangerous. You need to wean yourself off. And I don't recommend just stopping cold turkey to anyone, but
Okay.
I did. I stopped. Boom. Yeah, I'm starting meditation, coming off medication. Boom, same time.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I think that the meditation allowed me to come off of it like I did, and started to enjoy life again. Started to also deal with the depression and the anxiety, and that survivor guilt that I kind of put away in the basement for years. That bubbled to the surface during one of my meditations. I was like, this is it. This is what I've been struggling with.
Wow.
Yeah. So again, another long answer to your question, but I think
Oh, that's great.
the answer was a little bit of both. I recognized the depression and stress and anxiety. The Navy recognized it too and did what they thought was best for me. Then another Navy counselor recognized that I needed something else.
Right.
and recommended that I practice the mindfulness and meditation, and that's
I love
what I
that.
did. And again, I attribute it to changing my life for the better, and quite honestly, saving my life. And that I don't think I'd covered this, Curtis, in your first question. That's what I'm doing now. That's what I'm doing since retiring from the Navy. I've taken on a role as the deputy executive director in a nonprofit that is teaching mindfulness and meditation to veterans and military members because
Nice.
of how powerful it was in my life. I feel that I need to pay it forward. And talking about purpose, we talked about purpose earlier.
Mm-hmm.
That I feel, in addition to being a father and a good husband, bringing mindfulness and meditation to veterans and military members, that's my why. That's my purpose.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that you're bringing that, or that you recognized how much that helped your life, and now you're bringing it to other veterans and other military members. So yeah, real quickly, especially on the heels of Veterans Day, and as we're going into Thanksgiving and time with the families and the holidays, I know the holidays definitely bring out some of those mental challenges for folks being around family, and maybe it's smaller gatherings this year, because of COVID. But even with that, it's a change of environment, change of pace, and as Scott mentioned earlier, so many people start having these suicidal thoughts. They start having these challenges, these mental hurdles. So, what are some of those organizations that you work with and have found helpful, especially for military and veterans?
Yeah, sure. So I would be remiss if I didn't put a plug in
Yeah.
for my own organization, Veterans Path, where we teach that mindfulness and meditation to transitioning service members and veterans. And the reason I say transitioning service members is, yes, there's definitely stress of being a military member just writ large. But then as you transition, and I think a lot of the men watching today will identify with this, whether they're military or not. But as you transition, you've kind of hung your identity on your uniform for so long.
Right.
And once you hang that uniform up, you kind of hang your identity up with it. And then
Exactly.
you're left with this kind of, well, who am I? What is my identity? And that is in and of itself a stressful and anxiety inducing process.
Yeah.
So we are hoping to help transitioning service members with that by introducing them again to these life-changing, life-saving practices. But as far as the other organizations, I went through a program called the Honor Foundation, which we did some pretty uncomfortable work in figuring out what our why was,
Mm-hmm.
our new purpose. And initially, as I was going through military transition, I was like, hey, I'm going to be a commercial real estate guy or a private equity or financial advisor. And I think those are all great jobs. I do.
Right.
And I think they're important, but it's not something that really resonated with me. It's just a bright and shiny object that I was chasing. And luckily, through going through the Honor Foundation and then another foundation called the Commit Foundation, also a military transition program, they really helped me to figure out what it was that I wanted to do and what my purpose and my why was. And my purpose and why was to serve, continue to serve. I joined the military to serve. And now, even though I'd hung up the uniform, that piece of the identity that stayed with me was service. And that is where I am now, is continuing to serve. So the Honor Foundation and the Commit Foundation are some of the big military transition foundations that I fully support, and still feel that I owe my military transition to today. But then going back to that whole stress and anxiety part of military transition, and why I mentioned, I think some of the people who may be watching today that will resonate with them is being a dad who is married to a physician, not myself, but those in the audience. I think they may identify themselves in a certain way. They may identify themselves only as, somebody who's married to a physician. And that you're much more than that. You're a father, you are a husband, whether you're married to a physician or not, and then you're a man just as a whole. But then what type of man are you, and who are you as a man, as a husband, as a father? And if you're able to do some of that deep introspective work and identify your why, then I'm sure some of that I just mentioned will bubble to the surface. Your why is being a father. Your why is being a good husband. Your why is just being a man. But then even furthermore, what are you as an individual? And I think that's important work to be done for everyone. So hopefully that'll resonate with your audience, and maybe we'll get one or two meditators out of this.
No, that's fantastic. And speaking of which, folks watching this, if you have any questions for John about some of these different things, please chime in. Jason, if you have anything that comes to mind, feel free to unmute and pop in. But John, I think for a lot of folks, like you said, and a lot of the guys, especially on here, are very big into. We're very pro counseling. We're very pro seeking out help. We're pro engaging actively in making the decision to become better. A lot of times, like you said, we kind of do it passively, right? We want it to just happen to us, or assume that the life circumstances will just get better. But we realize that we have to be active in that approach. So especially now, while you're obviously beforehand being active military and now moving into active parenthood, especially with young kids, what does that look like? Because one of the issues, to be fully transparent, anger, the stress that comes along. My kids, as most of the folks know, are 11, 8, and 5. So 3 kids, virtual school, COVID, emergency physician working nights and weekends. So we're on opposite schedules. I'm still working full time. So in that moment, what does mindfulness look like for you when you've been up, in and out throughout the night? The 1-year-old one, is crying, will not go to sleep. You may be at your wit's end. What does mindfulness in those high stress moments look like for you, especially right now?
Well, first off, before I get into that answer, my hat is definitely off to you, Curtis. The stresses that come with a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old at home are completely different to the 3 that you have, and dealing with at home school and everything else. This whole world is being introduced to stressors that we didn't even realize a year ago.
Right.
But the tools that you have at your disposal are the same, whether you're a Navy SEAL on the battlefield, or whether you're a father of 3 little ones, or a father of 3 teenagers going through middle school and high school. The tools that you have at your disposal are the same, and that's where mindfulness and meditation definitely do feel they play a huge part. Granted, I haven't experienced the 11-year-olds and whatever other ages you mentioned there, but I have experienced the fits that my 3-year-old will throw, while my 1-year-old is pooping on me, or whatever the case may be. I've lived through some of that, and I know that what I do when that is happening, I literally, the natural man, the central nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system specifically kicks in, and wants to get angry, wants to get upset, and take my 3-year-old and be like, "Hey baby, you need to just shut up," which of course I'm not going to do. I'm not going to grab my 3-year-old and tell her that. So I take a deep breath in, let it out nice and slow, and just do that a couple of times. Or if I'm not even able to do that, I just pay attention to literally what my body is doing. I notice the stress response. I notice that my forehead is starting to tighten up, my jaw is starting to tighten up, my hands are starting to sweat, my heart rate is starting to increase, my respiratory rate is starting to increase. And just by noticing those bodily sensations, what's happening there, that's actually me tapping into the opposite, the parasympathetic nervous system, and I'm able to calm down. So I don't grab my 3-year-old daughter, which would wreck our relationship, or at least it would harm it for sure. And then if I were to do that in front of my wife, that would harm that relationship too. So what benefit do I get from the ancient response of that sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight response that's tapping into the amygdala, that ancient response that is there to save us from the saber-toothed tiger that's around the corner?
Right.
Am I more evolved than that? certainly I am more evolved than that. We are more evolved than that. And if we're able to notice that our fight or flight mechanism that is there to save us from the saber-toothed tiger, around the corner is kicking in, and realize that we are not being threatened like that. We're being threatened by our kids and the stress that may come from at-home school, and the stress that may come from our little 3-year-old throwing a fit because her Barbie doll head got chewed off by the dog. That literally happened this morning. So that's the reason I'm throwing that anecdote out.
It's
she
always
was so
something.
upset. I'm like, baby, we'll get you another one. This is not worth crying over. And I've even told her, hey, hold her, pick her up, and say, hey, baby, just take some deep breaths. Yeah. And she's 3. So her deep breaths are much more shallow than mine, but I can see when she does do that her parasympathetic nervous system is kicking in. And when I see that helps me out even more. So I guess the tools that I recommend are in the moment. Sure, you're not going to be able to sit down and meditate, you just don't have time to do that. But what you can do is just be very aware of your senses, be aware of the here and now, be aware that what is happening right now is not life-threatening. And there's no reason to tap into that fight or flight response, even though that's what you naturally want to do. And then that's in the moment. That's what you can do in the moment, right?
Nice.
But then the meditation, that what you can practice regularly on your own, that helps you to develop that neural pathway. So rather than tapping into your amygdala and your sympathetic nervous system, you're tapping into the prefrontal cortex and your parasympathetic nervous system, your vagus nerve, and you're able to calm yourself down more regularly. If you develop that neural pathway, that's more what your body's going to tap into if you do that over and over. So I talked about, sitting down to meditate for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, whatever the case may be, and you notice your mind races off. Well, the very fact that you notice, and then you come back to whatever anchor it is you're using, whether it's your breath, whether it's a mantra, whatever the case may be, that is literally rewiring your brain, physiologically rewiring your brain to where you're going to tap into that parasympathetic nervous system more naturally than you normally would. So you kind of set yourself up for that resilience by practicing meditation regularly. And then when you do practice and you get into a stressful situation, then your mindfulness taps in. That's when you're like, okay, just calm down, notice that you're starting to get stressed out, and bring yourself back into that kind of that middle and centered. And that helps with those stressful situations. Again, whether it's at home school with your middle schoolers, or whether it's your 3-year-old and your 1-year-old pitching a fit at the same time, or whether it's the battlefield.
Yeah, we're right. Exactly.
Yeah.
I love that. No, that's helpful. I think being able to, like I said, the name of the game is recognizing when those things are coming on you, right? When that stress is hitting. We were talking to one of our plus classes with another life coach, and kind of mindfulness was the thoughts come and go. Thoughts are neither good or bad, but what do we attribute? What emotions do we attribute to that? What actions do we attribute after those thoughts? And so, it all comes back to getting yourself in a place where you can recognize and catch those thoughts, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Just being present and realizing that, again, that you are most likely not in a life and death situation. Sure. If you are in a life and death situation, you probably want that amygdala kicking in a little bit, but most of the time we are not. Most of the time it is something that we can work through, just taking it step by step. I mean, one of the sayings that we have in the SEAL teams, and this is certainly not exclusive to the SEAL teams, I've heard it other places, but we talk about, what does it take to eat an elephant? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. One bite at a time. But if you look at that whole elephant, you're like, holy cow, that's a lot, right? I'm not going to be able to get through this. But if you take it one bite at a time, the reason that, that's even a saying in the SEAL teams is getting through the training that we go through, it's 6 months of butt kicking. Yeah. And if you look at that whole chunk of training at one time, it can be overwhelming. And that's when I think people quit, is they start to kind of get overwhelmed by the big picture. But if you're able to look at the, hey, here and now, okay, I just need to make it through this particular block of training right now, right here today. I just need to make it through this 1 hour. You get there that 1 hour, and then at the end of that, hey, you have a whole new evolution thrown at you. You're like, okay, I just need to get through this. Okay, I just need to make it to lunch. I just need to make it to dinner. And that's what you can do in life, right? You can just be like, hey, when middle school is kicking your butt at home for your kids and for you as a father, you're like, hey, you know what? I just need to make it to dinner. I mean, as a father right now of a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, my 3-year-old little girl, she's a handful, but my 1-year-old little boy, holy cow. I don't think I really appreciated the difference between boys and girls until my son started walking and just wanted to get into everything.
Yeah.
And every day it's a battle. And I love him to death, but every day it's a battle with him. And when my wife and I put him down to go to sleep at night, she and I just look at each other and we're like, all right, made it through another day. Made it through another day.
Celebration.
That's all you can do. Yeah, make it through each little day at a time, and eventually, you're gonna make it. You're gonna be all right. You're gonna be all right.
I love that. And Jason, I think your kids are older, right? Aren't your kids like high school and above? Oh, you're still muted, Jason. Nope. No, it looks like it's still on there. There you go.
There we go. Yeah, so my kids are, my daughter's 23 and my son's 19. Yeah. And man, I wish I could go back to when they were 3 and 1 again. Because I was the same way you were, John. My oldest, was a little girl. And, as a guy, it's easy to, hold and love on your little girl.
Yeah.
But when my son came along, I think because I didn't have a good relationship with my dad, man, I just ate that up, being able to hold and love on my son. And, now that he's 19, it's a little harder to do that. But he's still a good guy. So John, I actually had a question for you. I've obviously not dealt with the same stressors that you have, but I have had some things in my life that, affected me, and I went to the doctor, and kind of the same progression that you went through, where they prescribed anti-anxiety medications, which, like you said, they help with the symptoms, but not necessarily the cause. So you had mentioned the meditation app that you use, but I didn't catch the name of it. I was wondering if you might give that to me again.
Oh yeah, 100%. That's an easy one, man. Softball.
Yeah.
So that I was waiting. You were doing a big build up, and I was like, okay, big question coming. But yeah, no, the app is Insight Timer. That's the one that I started with, but there's literally hundreds of them. I mean, there's one called Calm, there's one called Headspace, one called Waking Up, another 10% Happier. And I think they're all good. It's, find what works for you. I personally like Insight Timer, but there's tons of other great ones out there.
Okay. So I do have maybe a little more challenging question. So like growing up, you always kind of imagine Navy SEALs as being 10 feet tall and bulletproof. And I can kind of understand where, when you're in the teams, you kind of have to adopt that persona at times to be able to do the mission that's given to you, to be able to put yourself in harm's way. But the few guys that I've met, in addition to you, I met Marcus Luttrell at a local event here in Houston that we were both attending. Got to talk to him for a few minutes. We had another recently retired Navy SEAL captain, I believe it was, who spoke with us earlier. And so, obviously it puts more of a human face on, this, perceived persona of what a Navy SEAL, or I guess any, special warfare warrior is. But so my question is, because I've kind of detected maybe like a certain personality style, and I'm just wondering, in terms of being able to deal with stress, do you feel like there's a certain personality of individual that just allows them to get through like SEAL team training, buds and everything? Or is there is that somehow baked into the individual? Are there are there methods and coping skills that you pick up along the way?
Yeah, great question. And I know Marcus and his brother Morgan, great guys. And, you know, obviously Marcus being the lone survivor, literally. And then he and Morgan, I've worked with both of them in the past. Morgan was actually at SEAL Team 10 with me on one of my last tours. But anyhow, that's not what your question was. So the type of person, I don't know that there's a single type, but I will say I think there's a level of grit that a special operator has to get through the training, whether it's Navy SEALs, whether it's Army Special Forces, whether it's Air Force PJs, Marine Raiders, whatever the case may be. I think there's a certain level of grit that it takes to get through that training initially, and then that training further enforces that grit, develops that grit over time. Both the initial training, you know, for SEALs, it's buds, and then when you get to the SEAL teams, as you're doing workups and training for each deployment, that grit is further reinforced. And then you're surrounded, as I mentioned before, you're surrounded by unbelievable people, and you're surrounding yourself with people who may be better than yourself. That is going to raise your bar. So I think that it's a little bit of both. You come into the training with a certain level of grit, and then it's further reinforced by the training and the people that you're surrounding yourself by. It's definitely a little bit of both.
It's good.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Good question, man.
You know, John, I have a follow-up question on that, because your story with your 3-year-old, and in the midst of a crisis, you know, the Barbie doll getting the head pulled off. You know, we've all been there. We've all had those meltdowns that, you know, to us might not seem like a big deal, but of course we then have our own, and you know, meltdowns and other situations that others might look at and say, well, why are you giving that so much weight? So,
Yeah.
but let's talk about it from a daddyhood, from a fatherhood perspective. So with the little ones, do you have any particular thoughts or methods that you either are currently employing, let's say with your 3-year-old, or that dads can do to instill that grit and that overcoming, and you can do this, you can do anything you put your mind to mindset into our kids? And while you think about that, my 11-year-old, and actually all my girls, but especially my 11-year-old, knowing that she's going to be out of the house in a few years. She's a cheerleader, she's a dancer, she's smart, she just joined the honor society, so she has all these amazing things going for her. And one of the things I notice sometimes is when that adversity does hit, sometimes she looks at us and says, do I have to do cheerleading again next year? And we're like, if you truly don't enjoy it, but we're not going to not do it because it's gotten difficult. So
Yeah.
So do you have any particular tips or things you do from a fatherhood perspective to instill grit in your kids, or will do?
Yeah. Well, I hope that I'm instilling some of it in my 3-year-old and my 1-year-old already, but yeah,
Right.
I haven't actually thought about it from that perspective.
Oh yeah.
As instilling grit in my 3-year-old and 1-year-old. But I think what you're doing right there with your 11-year-old is, you know, as far as talking to them about not quitting just because it got hard, I think that's huge. I think that's a very big one. I growing up, my father, I had a great relationship with him, but I didn't ever have I played baseball, football, and basketball in junior high and my first year in high school, and I also ran track and cross country. And that's what I ended up doing through the rest of my time in high school, was running track and cross country. But at one point, football, I wasn't enjoying it, and it was starting to get tough to juggle that in school and everything else, and I quit. It's one of the things that I quit, like not quit at the end of the season. I was just like, hey, you know what? I'm done. I'm quitting.
Oh, wow.
And my father didn't sit me down and say anything. But ironically, my track coach, so not my football coach, but my track coach, was like, hey, you know, you quit when something got difficult, and you're going to remember that for the rest of your life. And I did. I remembered it, and I still remember it to this day. And I'm like, that was a defining moment for me. And my track and cross country coach, same guy, who I still talk to today, and I consider as kind of my second father. He was the one who was hard on me about it. He wasn't mean about it.
Right.
He was just, hey, you know what? You quit when the going got tough. What does that say about you? And for the rest of my high school career, when I was running track and cross country, and I was, running a hard meet and like really thinking, oh man, this hurts really bad, I would think back to him saying that, hey,
Right.
you quit when the going got tough. And I think that lesson, and the lesson that you're teaching your daughter, that is probably something that would help to instill grit. Something similar to that is, hey, take a life example and say, look, this is where going got tough. It's not because you just hated the sport, because I didn't hate football. It was just, it was just getting difficult. And I think that's an important way. As far as instilling grit, or a tool that I use now for myself personally, is when my kids are going through a rant and getting fired up, is tapping into that parasympathetic nervous system that I talked about before, just taking a little breath and saying, you know what, this is not life or death. I can get through this, and making it through that. And I think, again, that's where the grit comes in, is realizing that, yes, the objective as a whole, oh man, if I looked at fatherhood as a whole, and like, man, I have to raise this kid, and I know the stressors that you guys are talking about are all going to be coming my way, how overwhelming would that be? No, I can't look at it like that, right? I have to look at it in little bite-sized chunks. So, like I mentioned before with my 1-year-old son, my bite-sized chunk is every day. Love him to death, and I love tossing him around and playing with him, but it's exhausting. Like you turn your head for a second and he's up a ladder, and I'm like, come on, man.
Right.
But yeah, I think the one is understanding, not quitting when the going gets tough, and knowing that that's a lesson in life. Like your daughter saying, okay, you know what, this may suck, but ultimately it's going to be a lesson that is going to make me a better person in life. I think that's first of all important. And the second piece is understanding, hey, make it day to day. And that's going to help you to be a person with more grit.
I like that. That's good. I like the chunking it, and Scott,
Yeah.
Being a leadership coach, he talks about that all the time. Chunk it, have those of that habit stacking, I think Scott calls it. So that's awesome. And Jason, I saw you were unmuted. Did you have a follow up, or did you have something else you wanted to add on?
No, I'm good, man.
And Scott?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So Jon, good news is your son will tame down. As a father of a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, boys, I can tell you that. The bad news is it's going to take about another 4.5 years. Because my oldest is exactly
man, that's not
how
helping
you
me. That's
describe
not
your
helping.
boy. I actually do have a question for you. So us men, right? We like to hold things in. We like to keep things to ourselves. And right now, especially with COVID going on, Christmas stressors upcoming, all this stuff, we might be seeing some changes in some buds, right? So not necessarily I, as a guy going through some mental health issues or having issues, difficulties going on, but what's your recommendations how we could reach out to guys who we think might be having stuff going on? And, how can we break through that shell? Because us guys, we like to guard it, right? It's like, no, this is me. But, we might see some of our good friends. They're like, something's off with Curtis is off lately, past, not today, but the past couple of weeks. Curtis, I'm just using.
No, I know.
So how can we? What's your best advice for us to get through and see if there's actually something going on, and then how we can help guide them in the right way?
Yeah, great question. And Curtis, I think you kind of asked a piece of that earlier, talking about how the stressors of COVID, and then more on top of that, the stressors of the holidays are coming up. And so I skipped answering that piece, but yeah, this time of year, it's definitely a happy time of year, right? Or at least that's what everybody expects it to be. And then when you are getting together with family, that's stressful, or when you're not able to get with family because of COVID, that is another side of that same coin. I think we as men, there's a couple of things we have to overcome. One, we're not as intuitive as our female partners, and we need to work on that. So we work on awareness. I won't call it intuition, because I don't know that we can work on that necessarily, but just awareness, paying attention. And that comes with, I talk mindfulness and meditation. So, hey, that comes with practicing those. And it truly does. It helps you to be more aware of not just your own life, but those of the lives of your friends, your family, your brothers, your sisters, your wives, whatever the case may be.
Right.
But in answering your specific question, Scott, it makes you more aware of how somebody may be changing their actions. I did a webinar yesterday with a gentleman who had lost his wife to suicide, and he mentioned being aware and of her actions prior to, but also just being aware of your friends, your family's actions. So the example that he used was, hey, you go to work and your buddy every day, he's bringing his lunch to work every day. And then suddenly he stops bringing his lunch. And it might not seem like much, right? At first glance, but maybe you ask him, you're like, hey, let's go to lunch today. You just ask him something simple. You don't ask him what's wrong.
Right.
Just, hey, let's grab lunch today. I see you're not bringing your lunch anymore. Let's grab lunch today. And then you go out with them and you just have a simple conversation. And in conversation, it comes up that, hey, he's been bringing his lunch every day for the past few years because his wife prepares it for him, or his spouse prepares it for him. And now she's not, because she's leaving him. And that's a piece that you never would have been aware of if you hadn't just taken the time to ask a simple question of, hey, let's get lunch together. And then during that lunch, maybe probe a little bit. You don't have to jump right into the hard question, which I think we as men, both in asking that question initially and in receiving or hearing that question on the other end, it's uncomfortable to ask, and on the other end, you get defensive. But if you kind of gradually work your way into that, so I guess to answer your question, Scott, one is be more aware and pay attention to little things, and then two is don't jump right in, unless it's a question that is as important as asking, hey, are you thinking about hurting yourself? I think that's a question that you have to be ready to get uncomfortable asking that question. And then on the other end, if you're starting to display some type of tendencies that may be going that way, be prepared to get asked that question. But I think the other side is you just gently probe. Hey, let's get to lunch. Hey, tell me how you're doing. That kind of thing, and then work your way into a little bit more deep question, more uncomfortable question. Work your way into it. I think that's the way to do it.
That's good.
There we go. That just shows why I asked you to come on, man.
No, that's fantastic. I mean, I love that you mentioned that, and something as simple as getting somebody out of their normal routine and sitting down with them, I like to say having lunch, that reminds me, and as we start to wrap up here, because I want to be respectful of your time, Jon, I appreciate all your insight and knowledge today. That reminds me, guys, if you haven't been dating your spouses, if you haven't been dating your children, something we actually haven't talked about this in a long, long time, but I would bring that back up. And I myself have gotten out of it, especially with COVID. I'm around them all the time. But now especially, we need to find a way to separate ourselves, from the kids, or get our kids individually and still sit down with them to ask those questions. Because of course, hey, how was school today? That's fine. Hey, how was your Zoom call? It was good.
Yeah.
but to be able to pull them apart from the rest of their siblings, away from the normal environment, and say, okay, let's sit down and really get into it. More specific questions, like you said, who are you playing with? Did you make some new friends? All those different things that could then lead to those deeper conversations.
Yeah. Hey, just on that note, Curtis, if you don't mind me jumping in. So one thing I learned is that every day when I put my 5-year-old to bed, I'm normally the one that does it. And if I don't, I make sure I do go through this before he goes to bed. I ask him 3 questions. I'm like, what was the favorite part of your day? So that he can reflect on, the good times. And then I'll ask him, what did you learn today? And more along the lines of, often like, oh, I learned that a a dog and a cheetah could be friends from a show he watched, right? And I was like, okay, cool. And then the final question is, what are you looking forward to tomorrow? To get him looking forward to something before he goes to bed. So I got that from another show, another podcast, and
That's
it's
good.
yeah. And now actually, my 5-year-old's even start. I can start talking to him about his feelings and stuff that he goes through in his day, with
Nice.
with that right at the end of the day. So just for the guys out there watching this, especially with young kids, really young kids, they can still even do it with the older ones too, right?
That's right.
You just gotta shift it a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's great, Scott, and I think that's one way to get people used to speaking about their feelings is starting early with the kids.
Right.
So you talked about your 5-year-old now talking about his feelings. If you can start that conversation early as a father with your children, one, they're going to be more open about speaking about their feelings later, which is important, as they start getting their teenage years, I'm sure. I mean, I was a teenager once, so I know it's important to speak about the feelings. I don't have a teenager, but I was a teenager. And that's a tough part of your life, right? And if you're able to talk about your feelings, whether it's with your family or whether it's with your friends, that's huge in mental health. And then I want to just mention this great movie. It's a kids movie, but it's great. You may have seen it. It's called Inside Out.
Yeah.
It's a Pixar movie where like all the emotions of a human are actually characters inside a person's brain. And there's a great scene where the mother is asking the daughter how her day at school was, and it shows all the different characters in her head and the mother's head. And then the mother's like, hey, how's your day? And the kid answers a certain way, and then the father is completely aloof, completely not paying attention, and the mother's like, inside her mind, the characters are like, signal the husband. And so she signals the husband, and the husband's like, all that's happening in his mind is sports and news and nothing about what's happening right there at the table. So I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that as men, we definitely have to be more intentional about paying attention to what's happening around us, whether that's at home with our beautiful children, with our beautiful spouse, or whether it's with our friends and our family and or our colleagues at work. We just need to be more intentional about paying attention. Intention about attention.
I love that. I love that. I love that we're ending on this note, because I think that's a great call to action for all of us is to be more mindful, and especially
Indeed.
right now when it's needed, even with our spouses. I mean, we've gotten to a level of comfortability with this whole COVID process and so on and so forth, but it's so important to make sure we're really checking in and making sure that especially those frontline workers are doing okay. And not just the normal
Absolutely.
questions, hey, how was work? But like you said, those opportunities to separate from everybody and dig a little bit deeper and ask those more
Definitely.
meaningful questions and get into that better conversation. So, Jon, I love it, man. Thank you so much for sharing your insight
My pleasure,
today.
guys. Yeah, this has been fun. Thank you for the opportunity. It's an honor, and definitely even just in speaking with you guys, the questions you asked helped me to definitely think about some things in my life that I'm going to go back and apply. Scott, great questions to ask your 5-year-old. I'm going to start asking my 3-year-old those questions.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate the time today and the lessons that I'm taking away from this.
And Jon, if people want to learn a little bit more about you or learn more about the organizations that you referenced with the Honor Foundation and Veterans Path,
Sure.
where can they best find you?
Yeah. So let's see. The Honor Foundation, I think the website is thf.org. The Commit Foundation, I'm not going to tell you the website right off the bat because I don't know it off the top of my head, but you can just Google the Commit Foundation. That's a great one for military. Both of those are great for military transition. Veterans Path, you can just Google, or not Google us, but go to the website veteranspath.org, veteranspath.org. And then we're all on social media on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, everything else. We have an associated podcast with that where I'm the host, and I bring on some pretty interesting guests that talk about their time with mindfulness and meditation or mental health, whatever that mental health aspect is.
Right.
And then to find me specifically, I'm on LinkedIn primarily, and it's just Jon Macaskill. Jon Macaskill
Right.
on LinkedIn. And as I try to always say when I get on something like this, I believe I'm the only Jon Macaskill Navy SEAL commander teaching mindfulness and meditation. So if you find that guy, that's me.
That's awesome, John. And we'll also put the links in the comments here so that guys can get to a little bit easier. But John, thank you so much. We'll definitely have to do this again.
Absolutely. My pleasure. It's been a joy. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
And for those joining us watching DMD or watching on one of our sites, thank you all so much for the time. Like I said, especially here in the month of November, we are doing a lot with men's health and focusing on how we can improve. If you have a topic that you'd like to see or something that you'd like for us to cover or guest, please let me know. And you can reach out to us at dadsmarriedtodoctors.com. Thank y'all. Have happy holidays.
Thanks, guys.